Hello Pokemon trainers and welcome back to round 6 of the Pokemon Utrecht Special Event 2023. My name is James Boyd, I'm still joined by Charlie Merriman, and yeah, we had a fantastic game once again coming out for that round 5. And I know you're particularly a fan because we did see 2 Mouseholds coming out.
Saw 2 Mouseholds, 8 mice on the field, I couldn't be happier. And throughout the day we've been seeing a lot of Mouseholds, but unfortunately the same can't be said for Jamie's favourite Gen 9 Pokemon in Baxcalibur.
Just you wait,
yeah.
Just you wait, it's waiting for the top table, so that's what we're going for. So we're going to see many in day 2, because that's where it deserves to be.
Ah, I see. Yeah, of course. The more Mouseholds you see on a team, the more chance there is of it being in day 2. But we'll believe Jamie there. We'll see some Baxcalibur day 2. And of course an Annihilate mirror going on in the previous game.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen Mousehold and Annihilate be such a potent combination with the beat-up strategy activating that Rage Fist immediately. It seemed like Nate was leaning more towards the Mousehold and Fluttermane rather than Annihilate. There just happened to be an Annihilate on the team. But yeah, Nathan committing very hard to it. It was successful in one of the games, but not so successful in the other game, and then committed to the Trick Room strategy instead, which didn't unfortunately pay out for him. But yeah, Mousehold and Annihilate still apparently is a very strong player, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. The beat-up, boosting up the power of Rage Fist is a force to be reckoned with. And another match that went to 3 games. Jamie and I have had a relatively easy time of it with our casting so far. Both our games have been only 2 matches, but again, maybe Caster's Curse, maybe I've just ruined that for us.
Well, we're still aiming for that Icy Wind Miss. Who knows? Exactly. That's going to be coming at some point, just you wait. But yeah, we've had some very long drawn-out games. There's been a couple of steamrolls, which is showcasing either side of Pokemon, right? Because you can get these very positional, try and outplay your opponents. Like, it will take maybe the full 20 minutes sometimes kind of games. There's going to be some games you win in 2 minutes. Yeah. So, yeah, it swings and roundabouts when it comes to what kind of match you're going to be playing.
And also down to different play styles. Some players prefer the stamina-based match as opposed to the hyper-offense, just sweep, sweep, sweep. And yeah, it all comes down to what you're best suited to. The mental resilience you require for a longer game like the ones we've been seeing is absolutely not something to be sniffed at, but it's whatever works for each trainer.
Yeah, and do you go with a comfort pick? It seems like some players are doing that. We saw Aurelian, who's been using their team that they've been using the entire time that I think throughout the entirety of Regulation B, they stuck with the same team. And then we saw Taran coming off a regional win using something completely different. Yeah. So you may go for comfort, you may go for what you think would be the meta call as well. It depends on what you think and whether you can adapt to what would be the meta call, or do you go for that comfort pick instead?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's still, you know, Generation 9 has been out for approaching 6 months now. But there's still, I feel, a lot of untapped potential, a lot of unexplored things, and Pokemon that occasionally crop up that you don't expect to see on teams such as Bellibolt. We've seen a few times in the regionals over the past couple of months, and yeah, plenty more Pokemon to re-explore, and also new abilities from existing Pokemon, abilities like Sharpness, for example.
Yeah, Sharpness is a really cool ability. Actually making Gallade not need its Mega Evolution anymore is really cool. But then, do you use a Gallade instead of a Medicham? Because Medicham is also pretty strong at the point, like going for a Psychic and Fighting type attacks as well. Close combat kind of matches the Sacred Sword Sharpness, so it's going to be very, very close in which one you would be wanting to use there. But yeah, like you said, some really cool abilities coming out that make some older Pokemon a little bit more viable than they were before. Yeah,
worth exploring, or a good old well-baked body from a Daxbum. We haven't seen many of those recently, but who knows, maybe we'll be able to at some point. And we just had confirmation we can have a look at the standings, how things are going so far today. So why don't we take a look at the leaderboard so far, and look at all of those 5-0s, very impressive performances there. Names like Eric Rios and Taran Birdie, of course, Thomas Gravui, players from all over the world who have been doing incredibly well in prior seasons as well as this one.
Yeah, plenty of names we recognise. There's a few that we don't, but as we've seen previously, that is not normally an indication now in this generation of how well a player should be doing. You can turn up to your first tournament, you can win your first tournament, absolutely, and we can see all of these players that are currently 5-0, plenty of opportunities to be able to get those last 2 wins to guarantee you make it into that day 2. Of course, because now we do have the day 2 Swiss, you obviously want to be winning as many as you can still in that day 1, because it will factor into that day 2, but a 5-0 is a fantastic start.
An incredible start, and thank goodness these trainers are able to have a sleep after round 9, because a full day of 14 rounds of Swiss, that isn't something to be taken lightly. And now we can see 17 through to 32 here. Names like Eduardo Cunha, the current world champion, who I had the pleasure of interviewing earlier, Fabian Kuhl, Sam Bentham of the UK, still, 4-1 at this stage in the day is a really impressive performance.
Yeah, and only 17 of the players are 5-0 at the moment, so always interesting to see an odd number, because then it's going to have some kind of pair up or pair down. That will affect the resistance going forwards as well. But yeah, very, very strong performances coming out from all these players so far.
It's the fact that they're still performing at this caliber at this stage in the day. It's not particularly late in the day, but when you've been going for as long as these trainers have, with a very early start and the mental capacity that's required to play long games of Pokemon, it's I take my hat off to them.
Yeah, absolutely. We're over halfway through. This is now going into the 6th round. We played 5 games. It's 9 rounds for the first day of Swiss, so we're over halfway at this point. But yeah, this is where the tiredness may start to be kicking in for some players. It is a long day. 9 rounds is quite a long time. You do need the mental aptitude to be able to carry on with your play consistently across the matches and try and keep it at the same level throughout, which can be quite difficult, but is a skill that some players definitely do have.
Absolutely. Top tip, stay hydrated. Just keep the water away from any electronic devices.
Absolutely. Very good advice for sure. And if you wanted to keep even more hydrated, hydrated. That's almost a Pokemon.
Hydreigon, Iron Jugulus.
Hydreigon, there we go. That's how you stay hydrated. Use Hydreigon. I was going for Pelipper, but there we go. So somehow it turned into Hydreigon instead, which has turned into an Iron Jugulus. So there we go.
Water Terror, Hydreigon, maybe that's what we would
There we go, that's the one, that's the call.
Yeah.
Definitely the call.
That's the call.
I mean, water's not bad with a dragon type, because you're already resisting grass and electric, so if they're going for that, you just stay as the normal dragon type. So
you heard it here first. Water Hydreigon will win the Utrecht.
I mean, we did see back in OCIC, there was a psychic type Hydreigon that made the top 8, and normally it had been fire and steel before, and sometimes poison. Those are the best ones to resist fairy. Obviously, you want to be resisting fairy as a quad weak dark and dragon. Psychic is neutral, but it's able to take things on like Great Tusk a lot better, because you've got the levitate ability. Then the close combats won't do much to you with the psychic typing as well, so still a pretty good defensive typing.
Yeah, and it's interesting how I think when we got into this Paradox Pokemon format, we were excited to try Iron Jugulus, the future version of Hydreigon. But it seems like Hydreigon itself has been picking up a little bit of news. People being reminded, you know what? Iron Jugulus is good because the Pokemon it's based on is kind of good, so maybe we should revisit that. Well,
now you've got the competition of Roaring Moon, right? So, like, Iron Jugulus is different enough. Like, the Dark Flying changes it noticeably because you don't have the 4 times weakness to Fairy. Therefore, it can take a Moonblast if it has to. The Hydreigons and the Roaring Moons need to Terrasilize to stop that. So it comes down to, if I want a Dark Dragon, is it Roaring Moon? Is it Hydreigon? Hydreigon's been very effective in Regulation A. We saw it. One of the top tier, maybe even like top 3 Pokemon of Regulation A. But then as soon as Roaring Moon came in, it was probably new toy syndrome, as in, I want to try out Roaring Moon. Is it better than Hydreigon? I just forgot about that for now. Let's test Roaring Moon. But now we've got to this point. I would say that Roaring Moon is definitely still more common than Hydreigon. So does that mean that it's going to be more effective in Regulation B? Because they do effectively different things, because one's a special attacker, one's a physical attacker. So it's a notable change.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't have both on your team. You'd only have one.
Yeah.
So it will come down to the team construction that you built around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Hydreigon and Roaring Moon going into Regulation C, given we'll have all of these new Dark-type Pokemon, I would expect that we'd see, well, we barely see any Hydreigon now, I'd expect to see even fewer, and when it comes to Roaring Moon, that too could take a hit in terms of its popularity.
No, it's going to be able to resist the Dark types coming out from the Ruin Pokemon when they join, so it won't be too bad, and Dark Dragon takes on Chi-Yu very well. Definitely not Chien-Pao. Absolutely not Chien-Pao, but definitely Chi-Yu. So it will still definitely have some place in the matter.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't recall a time when we've ever had a new regulation introducing Pokemon all of one type and centralizing a meta around a certain type of Pokemon. That would be really exciting to see what happens.
Especially given the fact that the most common Pokemon is a Fairy type.
Yeah,
that's going to be an interesting one, because if you've got the most common Pokemon being a Fairy type, but here's 4 Dark types, the Fairy type's still going to theoretically beat the Dark types. But, well, the Chi-Yu is at least neutral, so that's something for it. And of course, you can tear it out of your weakness to Fairy, but is Fluttermane still going to keep the #1 spot? Is it going to drop to one of the Ruin Pokemon? is it going to stay as good as it is? Because Fairy would be very good against Dark-type Pokemon.
Yeah, absolutely. All questions that should be answered over the next few weeks as we get into Regulation C, and we can't wait to see what happens there. But now we're going to get into stage for our next round, our Swiss Round 6 match, as the players take their seats.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait to get into this game. It's going to be a fantastic one. Obviously, at this point in the tournament, then we're going to have two very, very strong players, because they are going to be 5-0 at this point.
Absolutely. Players who have had a fantastic record so far as they take their seats here. And it's Michael Kelsch versus Juan Odriozola. And we can see their achievements so far. Michael Kelsch, 2023 Bochum Regionals top 8, very recently, of course. And Juan Manuel, Bilbao Special Event top 8 back in 2022. So players who have had very recent victories and very impressive ones at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming off recent finishes is always going to be a boost for you, because then you'll be able to try and keep that momentum going as you go forward into the season. Especially the 2023 Bochum Regional Championships, that was the last one we just had. So coming off a top 8 from that is going to be very, very good for them.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And I wonder if we will see from these trainers similarly meta Pokemon that we've seen so far. We saw an Iron Jugulis in the last game. That was exciting to see. And continuing our theme of Hydreigon and Iron Jugulis, will we see another of those? Will we see more Paradox Pokemon that we haven't seen as much of previously? And now I can see these teams. So for Michael Kelsch, it's Great Tusk, Tyranitar, Talonflame, Iron Bundle, Fluttermane, and Dragonite. So the 3 Paradox Pokemon there, 2 past, 1 future. And my eye is drawn to this clear amulet on the Tyranitar.
Yeah, that is a very unique Tyranitar. Everything else seems pretty standard and as expected, but the clear amulet is definitely a standout. That's as opposed to the very common Assault Vest, which is then on the Dragonite instead of the Tyranitar. Then you're going to be able to make yourself immune to the Intimidates or any kind of stat drops for that fact. So the fact that you've got a Dragon Dance to be able to boost your speed, that means Icy Wind can't drop you back down. The reason that Dragon Dance hasn't been as common in Tyranitar as it has been in previous generations, you don't outspeed some Pokemon, like Fluttermane and like Iron Bundle, even at a +1 speed boost. You're going to outspeed most, but not all. And that's maybe put players off from going for the Dragon Dance previously, but if you get 2, then you're going to be outspeeding. So that's what you're going to be aiming for.
It's a difficult strategy to index too heavily on getting up multiple stat boosts, but it's one that could pay dividends. And I also really like that the Focus Sash here is on the Great Tusk, because of course the Sandstream set up by the Tyranitar, that would ordinarily deal chip damage, but Great Tusk being a ground type, including its Terra type, it will be able to keep that sash intact.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got Inner Focus as the choice on the Dragonite as well. So if you had the multi-scale, you could potentially break that with your own Sandstream. So a good choice there to have the Inner Focus as well. So good synergy with the Sandstream overall. No anti-synergies of breaking your own Focus Sash or breaking your own multi-scale. So going to end up working out very well here. But we can look at what Juan is going to be using as well. Again, some very tried and true Pokemon coming out. Another Dragon Dancer though. We usually see Tailwind on the Roaring Moon, but it is going to be opting for the Dragon Dance instead.
Yeah, it seems to be a very offensive Roaring Moon with that booster energy, so it uses up its item and then gets off an Acrobatics, which gets a boost in power when you don't have any item attached. And Palafin with this classic set, Wave Crash, Jet Punch, Haze, Protect. Haze, of course, rising in popularity in Palafin in order to completely reset the stats on the field. Very useful when you're up against something like a Dondozo, say.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen the combination of Amoonguss, Arcanine, and Palafin as probably the most common Fire-Water Grass core that we have at the moment in Regulation B. And it's so often paired with Fluttermane as well. We saw it previously come into the fray on Wolfglick's Perish Song team, but then it proved that it can just be doing the damage without the need for Perish Song. We can see that with the Fluttermane having the choice specs instead of the Focus Sash and going for the Perish Song instead. It's proven that it can still be very defensive, get the switches around, which obviously you want to be doing with all of the Pokemon, especially the Fire-Water Grass core. Amoonguss wants to regenerate with the Regenerator. Arcanine wants to cycle the Intimidate. Palafin wants to become a hero. So all of them do like the defensive switching, and then that combos together really nicely. You can also do that as well with the Iron Hands that can go for the Volt switches with so much bulk available with the Assault Vest.
We all want to become a hero, Jamie, and Palafin is a Pokemon that has shown its capability for doing that many, many times. And yet, Iron Hands, a Pokemon that it's so bulky, especially with that Assault Vest, but can also deal such damage out. It's a real force to be reckoned with. And looking at Michael's team, of course, it has the Dragonite that can help against the Iron Hands, and of course, Great Tusk dishing out some ground-type moves. But of course, this Iron Hands has the Terra type of Grass.
Yeah, the grass has got to be the most common one on Iron Hands at this point. mainly because it does resist ground. That is the big thing, because Great Tusk would be one of your main counters to it, but then you're going to get the extra synergy of ignoring the potential spores and rage powders that come out from the Monks as well.
That's right, and now we can get into round 1, game 1 of this Swiss round 6. And for Michael, the leads are Talonflame and Fluttermane, and for Juan Manuel, we have the Palafin and Fluttermane.
Yeah, so you do want to try and switch out your Palafin as soon as possible. That is why players opt to lead with it very often. You very rarely see a Palafin left in the back. Makes a lot of sense to be leading with it here so you can get it straight out. But it can very much just go on the offensive. If you go for a Jet Punch into the Talonflame, that's still going to do some very, very good damage, even in the zero form. Even a Wave Crash would be able to take care of it as well. You do have the reduced defenses that you haven't quite got as your hero form yet, so if you do stay in to try and take care of the Talonflame this turn, then you're going to be open to more damage from the opposing Fluttermane.
We do see the Palafin going for the switch out, wanting to activate its 0 to hero ability when it comes back in favour of Arcanine, throwing down an Intimidate onto the field, which Talonflame doesn't appreciate. Fluttermane doesn't mind it so much. And we go for the immediate terror. One of these Pokemon is going to be changing its type, and it's going to be the Fluttermane into the Fairy type, being able to dish out so much more damage with its Fairy moves than it would have been able to before, and that is the Fluttermane that belongs to Juan Manuel. And it's a responding terror on Michael's side. Let's see if it's Fluttermane for Fluttermane, and it is, and Michael is terrestrializing his Fluttermane, but this one goes into the Steel type, which is going to be able to resist any Fairy type moves coming out from Juan's Fluttermane so much better. Talonflame, meanwhile, sets up a Tailwind, so Michael's Pokemon will be moving faster than Juan Manuel's for the most part. As a Shadow Ball comes out into this Fluttermane, it's no longer super effective damage because it's become the Fairy type. Meanwhile, Juan Manuel's Fluttermane responds with a Dazzling Gleam, which is not very effective on either of these Pokemon.
Yeah, that's the reason that you go for that Terra Steel, to make yourself have way better resistances. And it's very, very common start to the game where you do have a Fluttermane versus Fluttermane. Shadow Ball will have the potential to knock out the opposing Fluttermane, therefore you want to be going for a Terra defensively in this case. Usually the Fairy one is used offensively, and yeah, it did some extra damage with the Dazzling Gleam, but that was mainly so it could survive the Shadow Ball. We saw that the Shadow Ball did do over half damage to the Fluttermane. That means it would have been KO'd if that was able to get that into just the regular Ghost Fairy type.
That's right, so an absolutely crucial terror there as we see the Arcanine switching out for Juan Manuel into that bulky, bulky Iron Hands, which is immediately responded to with a Brave Bird from Michael's Talonflame, which doesn't do a great deal of damage, and it's a double up into that slot with a Shadow Ball as well, bringing down the Iron Hands to half health as we go for another Fairy Terror boosted Dazzling Gleam on Juan Manuel's Fluttermane. And even though it's not dealing super effective damage, that is damage that is racking up.
Yeah, absolutely. Just allowing that Fluttermane to just start spamming all those Dazzling Gleams with the Fairy Terror, that's still doing significant damage even into the resist. The Talonflame won't be able to take another one here. The Iron Hand switching in, very nice to be able to soak up all those moves, and just about going to be KO to the combination of the other two attacks. It's going to be very close if that were to be launched off into the Iron Hands again, whether that's going to be able to pick up the KO, because that looks like exactly half damage there.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, really close, and a good switch in for the Iron Hands to soak that up. Really nice to leave the Fluttermane on the field to start spamming those Dazzling Gleams once again. So you've got the choice now. Do you double into the Iron Hands and hope that that combination does enough damage once again to be able to pick up the KO? But then you have to contend with the fact that the Fluttermane still is able to launch off the Dazzling Gleams. But then now that you're a Steel type on the Fluttermane, you can be faked out.
And indeed, that is what we see as Talonflame goes for a Brave Bird into the Fairy-type Fluttermane. And we see another Fairy Terror boosted Dazzling Gleam coming out from Juan Manuel's Fluttermane, and Talonflame does go down. Fluttermane for Michael sticks around for another turn.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, really nice from that Fluttermane on one side of the field. Still going to be able to launch off all the Dazzling Gleams here. And yeah, really, really nice for that Pokemon. We got the Great Tusk joining the field. That does not appreciate the Dazzling Gleams coming out. We should have one more turn of Tailwind though, so it should be able to outspeed this Fluttermane once again. Going for an Earthquake would be able to pick up the KO on either Pokemon, but then you'd be definitely KOing your own Fluttermane at this point. You're probably going to be able to pick up the knockout on either Pokemon if you just go for the single target attacks though. You've still got the Shadow Ball that you're locked into on Michael's side of the field, and then you can follow up with a Headlong Rush into the opposing Iron Hands, which you know can't go for the Grass Terror now because that has been committed on the Fluttermane instead.
Absolutely. This Iron Hand doesn't like facing down the Great Tusk. On the other hand, Great Tusk doesn't like facing down the Fluttermane. So a repositioning of board state here, which completely turns the tides because, of course, Talonflame and Steel Terror Fluttermane did not mind taking those Fairy-type moves. knows, same can't be said for Great Tusk, because we finally see Juan Manuel's Fluttermane going back to its Pokeball in favour of Arcanine again in order to drop the attack stat of Great Tusk. So its physical attacks won't be dealing quite as much damage, but Electric and Fire on Juan Manuel's side, they don't appreciate a Ground-type move. In fact, we see the Iron Hand switch as well. It's a double switch for Juan Manuel as Palafin comes back in. There it is. Zero to Hero has activated. It's on its dorsal fin, or on its tail fin, and ready to deal some massive damage. And we see Shadow Ball coming out from Fluttermane, which is big damage into Arcanine, and a headlong rush immediately onto this Palafin, taking away about a third of its health, and in response, Great Tusk eats up a defense drop.
Yeah, so now it's going to be in range of the Jet Punch for sure. The Focus Sash will save it, but you can follow up with an Extreme Speed from the Arcanine as well. So do you go for that and just accept that you're going to take a Shadow Ball on one of your Pokemon? Because that would be able to take the knockout on the Great Tusk and stop any of the headlong rushes or the Earthquakes coming out as well. But also the Fluttermane, it's going to be choice specs. You've got a guaranteed hit into that slot. Do you take it with either the Jet Punch or the Extreme Speed? Because if you do choose to go for that and KO the Fluttermane, Great Tusk survives this turn thanks to its Focus Sash. Because even if it's an Extreme Speed into Fluttermane, you won't be able to KO the Great Tusk with even the Jet Punch, even though it would bring it down to the Focus Sash at this point because of the drops from the Headlong Rush previously. You're not going to be able to knock out either Pokemon this turn, and definitely not if it's going for Protect.
Which we see it do. So no damage coming out from the Great Tusk this turn, but a Jet Punch comes out into the Fluttermane, and that is, of course, easily enough to get the knockout. So Michael has lost his Fluttermane and indeed his Talonflame. He's down to his last two Pokemon. Arcanine attempts a Will-O-Wisp perhaps there. Not entirely sure, but Great Tusk protects anyway as we see Michael's fourth Pokemon, Iron Bundle, coming back in.
Yeah, Will-O-Wisp would have made the most sense there instead of the Flare Blitz, because if you do burn that Great Tusk, it's completely useless. It would be intimidated, and it would have taken the drop, and you would have still been able to break the Focus Sash by going for that Will-O-Wisp as well. That means a follow-up Jet Punch would then just be able to pick up the KO. So yeah, nice play there, being able to cover for the fact that you guaranteed a Jet Punch into that slot. It could have switched into the Iron Bundle, could have been preserving the Fluttermane on Michael's side of the field, but instead being able to take care of that with the Palafin, really nice coming out for Juan. And now you've got to contend with this Iron Bundle at least. The Arcanine is really low. It might even be in just Freeze Dry range at this point. The Palafin has taken a lot of chip damage as well. Is that going to be in range of Freeze Dry? That's going to be a very close one because Palafin gets a lot of defenses when it does turn into that hero form. But Iron Bundle itself is a very strong Pokemon. It'll be really close if that is going to be able to pick up the KO. If either Pokemon is able to survive whatever comes out from the Iron Bundle, they'll be able to do whatever they want this turn. And it's going to start off with an Extreme Speed.
It's a fairly crucial turn, and it is that Extreme Speed coming out first from the Arcanine. And yes, the Jet Punch is able to pick up the knockout on the Great Tusk after those defense drops it took. And Iron Bundle, meanwhile, is going for the Freeze Dry onto the Palafin, and it is enough to pick up the knockout. It's knockouts all round. It certainly is a decisive turn as Palafin goes back to its Pokeball as well. And now Michael is down to just this Iron Bundle. Meanwhile, Juanma is able to send in his Iron Hands again.
Yeah, so 3v1, you should be able to take care of the Iron Bundle with that. You're going to be able to store out the Southern Fake Out, sure, with this Protect, but then you still got to be able to take care of the Iron Hands with an Assault Vest, which is almost certainly not going to happen in one turn. And then even if you are managed to get that knockout, Flare Blitz is probably going to put the Iron Bundle in Extreme Speed Rage, and even if it doesn't, there's the Fluttermane waiting in the back. So Iron Bundle is not usually the Pokemon to make a 1v3 comeback here.
It's really not. Absolutely brutally put there by Jamie, but it's completely true. Iron Bundle against the world at this point, and it is sticking around. It's going for that Freeze Dry, maybe fishing for a freeze, and it's not enough to deal that much damage at all as a Flare Blitz comes out from Arcanine into Iron Bundle. The recoil damage is something to be reckoned with, and it does knock itself out, but of course there is still that Fluttermane in the back that can come in. But a Drain Punch coming out from Iron Hands is enough to pick up its Iron Buddy opposite in the form of the bundle, and it's game one to Juan Manuel.
Yeah, very nicely played from both players there. It did end up being closer than it looks like with just the two Pokemon left, because it did sound like it was a good start coming out from Michael. Like the Talonflame getting the Tailwind means that your Fluttermane is faster than the opposing Fluttermane, but then it was kind of just the Fairy-type Fluttermane was allowed free reign, just Dazzling Gleam, Dazzling Gleam, Dazzling Gleam. There are plenty of opportunities to take the knockout on that Pokemon because they're both choice specs, they can't protect. They're going to be doing the massive damage. You need to take care of that massive damage. Yeah. The Steel typing was good because then the Dazzling Gleam theoretically won't be doing too much to you. 3 Dazzling Gleams, on the other hand, that's better than just a neutral hit against the resistances of the Talonflame and the Fluttermane. So the fact that 3 Dazzling Gleams were allowed to be fired off meant that actually significant damage was put on the field. And then you've got priority moves in the back. You've got Extreme Speed on Arcanine. That will pick off weakened targets. You've got Jet Punch in the back. That will pick off not even weakened targets most of the time because Palafin's so strong. So yeah, you do need to be careful with the damage you are allowing on your side of the field when it comes to taking care of the Pokemon in the back that do have access to the priority and can just clean up the game.
Goes to show how much that damage can just stack up, and it's something it's all too easy to ignore, I think, in VGC. You think this is not very effective hit, that's something I don't need to worry about. Maybe on this turn, but what are you going to do in the subsequent turns where your health is just being eaten away, as we saw in games involving Glamora, for example. And going into Game 2, you can see Michael seriously considering what his game plan here should be.
Yeah, absolutely. The Talonflame doesn't really seem like it's the most necessary. If you're going for Tailwind, that will mean that your Fluttermane outspeeds the opposing Fluttermane. But we've seen that that doesn't really matter because both players are perfectly content going for their Terra so that Shadow Ball is not a KO. And we still don't actually know the speed interactions yet of the Fluttermane. Maybe Michael's is still even faster than Juan's regularly regardless, and then the Tailwind would be completely unnecessary because you're replacing the slow Pokemon in the Iron Hands. Arcanine's reasonably fast, but you don't particularly need to outspeed it too much. And Palafin often wants to just go for Jet Punch anyway. So Talonflame, Tailwind would be nice in the Fluttermane versus Fluttermane, but that's about it. And then the rest of the Pokemon don't really need the Tailwind. You're going to be outspeeding with a lot of your Pokemon anyway, especially if you're bringing the Iron Bundle in the back. If you go with Iron Bundle as your speed control instead of the Talonflame, that will be able to put on the offense while still just being able to go for an Icy Wind as well. We saw that Palafin, even just some chip damage, was enough to put it into range of Freeze Dry. Even though it gets those great defenses, Iron Bundle was strong enough. So maybe lean with the Iron Bundle instead of the Talonflame. Is the Tailwind that necessary? That's the question that Michael's got to ask himself.
And a profound question indeed as we get into Game 2 and we see the leads. And it is Talonflame again, but this time with the Dragonites for Michael. And for Juan Manuel, it is Palafin and Fluttermane.
Yeah, so still opting with the Talonflame here. You've got to keep in mind that Talonflame still has a priority attack. Just once. As soon as the Gale Wings is broken, then you no longer have access to that, but you can still go for a double priority here. If you wanted to be going for Extreme Speed in the Brave Bird, you absolutely can. Probably not the best idea into the Fluttermane unless you're really hard calling that it is going for that Terra Fairy to be going for the Extreme Speed, but you're going to be able to still threaten massive damage. If you go for the Terra typing on the Dragonite, Terra Blast is almost certainly going to be able to pick up that KO as well. We've already seen on the team sheet this is an inner focus Dragonite. Arcanine switching in here does not affect it with that Intimidate.
It does, however, affect the Talonflame. That takes it an attack drop as we see another first turn Terra coming out from Michael onto his Dragonite. So a complete change from the first game. And it is, of course, that Terra flying Dragonite. We'll see if it's able to put in some work this game. We've certainly seen some very handy Dragonites in previous games on stream today as Talonflame does go for another Tailwind. And we'll see if it's more effective this game as opposed to the previous one. Meanwhile, Dragonite responds with a flying type Terra Blast into Fluttermane. It's not enough for the knockout, but it does bring it very low indeed. A responding Dazzling Gleam, which Dragonite can take much better now. It's no longer a Dragon type, and of course, is not very effective on the Talonflame.
Yeah, that is a very nicely trained Fluttermane there. Fluttermane classically known for having very poor defenses, and most gentle breezes can knock it over, but having access to the choice specs allows you to invest more into your defenses. You don't need to invest much into your special attack because you're already doing the damage, therefore you can invest in the defenses. So even though it couldn't be intimidated, Dragonite was not strong enough there. Really, really nicely trained Fluttermane coming out for Juan.
Absolutely. It's important to note that the Fluttermane special defense is much better than its physical defense, but still, that's clearly a calc that Juan knows well, as a Will-O-Wisp is able to come out from the Talonflame into the Fluttermane. It doesn't mind having its attack stack halved, but that damage will rack up, as another, perhaps, flying Terra Blast was aiming for the Arcanine that went for the Protect. Fluttermane able to respond with another Dazzling Gleam, taking both Pokemon down to about half. It's able to survive the burn this turn, but not for much longer.
Yeah, potentially calling maybe an Iron Hands or a Palafin switch in there for the Fluttermane, trying to preserve it, but no, the Fluttermane contents to do what it did in that game 1, stay on the field and just click the Dazzling Gleam button. And the damage is still racking up. Both Pokemon, Dragonite is basically taken half damage, and the Talonflame has taken half damage. So yeah, still content to just leave that Fluttermane on the field. Even if they don't attack it this turn and just double into the Iron Hands, the burn will take it out this turn at least.
It absolutely will, and Brave Bird comes out into the Iron Hands. Look at the bulk on that Pokemon. It shrugs that off easily as Dragonite is able to go for another Terra Blast of the flying type, this time into the Iron Hands. Oh my goodness, with a critical hit. That is a huge amount of damage onto the Iron Hands. Dazzling Gleam again, chipping away. That Talonflame is not going to be able to take much more in terms of health, and the Fluttermane does go down thanks to the Will-O-Wisp on the previous turn. It might have been intended for something like the Iron Hands, but it put in the work against that Fluttermane.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's, again, 3 Dazzling Gleams that were allowed to be launched off there. You could have limited it to 1. On on turn 2, you could have gone for Brave Bird or just Terror Blast into that Flutter Mane. That would have been able to pick up the KO. And then on turn 3, content to let the burn take care of it, but that's still extra damage on the Dragonite and Talonflame. Both of them are almost certainly in extreme speed range at this point. The Dragonite's extreme speed would go before the opposing Arcanines, but I don't think that's enough to be able to pick up the KO on the Iron Hands at this point. And even Fake Out would be a priority move that can take care of at least the Talonflame, probably not the Dragonite, but Dragonite is likely in range of the extreme speed as well, so you can just go for a Fake Out into the Talonflame pretty unopposed at this point and pick up the KO, and then Arcanine will be able to follow up the KO on the Dragonite as well, and then the Tailwind would have started to be stored out there.
Extreme speeds all around, and of course there is the Tailwind to take into account, and it is an extreme speed, or should I say turbo tempo, coming out from Dragonite with a responding turbo tempo from Arcanine. Extreme speeds all around. It's enough to pick up the knockout onto Dragonite on Michael's side, so his Terror is over and his Dragonite is down. Meanwhile, this Talonflame is on very low health, and a Brave Bird here is not quite enough to pick up the knockout on the Iron Hands. It takes that recoil damage, but survives, but it won't survive of a Volt Switch coming out from Iron Hands, as Iron Hands will go back to Juan Manuel, force something in the back, and Michael is down to his last 2 Pokemon.
Yeah, so not opting for the KO on the Talonflame there. I think that little bit of chip damage from the Brave Bird is not too impactful. We'll have to see if that is going to come into play. But being able to get that pivoting action with the Volt Switch, now here's the Palafin on the field, as opposed to the very weak Iron Hands. So going for Fake Out there would have been nice to just immediately pick up the KO, but so does Volt Switch, and that gives you extra pivoting out into the Palafin as well. So that's going to put on much more offense than the Iron Hands would have done, and also provide a lot more bulk on this field at the moment, given that Michael is switching their last 2 Pokemon in. We've got the Iron Bundle and we've got the Flutter Mane here. We know that the Flutter Mane is going to be that Choice Vex variant, so going to be completely open to an attack from either of these Pokemon. At least you can't go for an Extreme Speed and Jet Punch, which should have been able to pick up the KO on the Flutter Mane, but you can still get a KO with Wave Crash. You can maybe get a KO with Flare Blitz. It depends on how the Flutter Mane is trained. We've already seen the previous Flutter Mane on one side of the field. The Choice Vex variant was very bulky. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case for Michael's as well.
Juan Manuel's Palafin goes for the Terror into the Water type. It will be able to deal out massive damage with its Water type moves, as if the damage wasn't massive enough already. And here we go. It's a Water Terror boosted Jet Punch coming out into the Flutter Mane. It's not quite enough for the knockout. A very well-trained Flutter Mane, as Freeze Dry comes out from Iron Bundle into the Palafin, brings it down to about 1/4 of its health. And Shadow Ball following up from Flutter Mane into Palafin. This will be enough for the knockout. And so it's now these two, the most common Paradox Pokemon in this format so far, the Iron Bundle and Flutter Mane against the Arcanine and Iron Hands for Juan Manuel.
You see that, there's still a Flare Blitz, but it's
Blitz.
going into the Iron Bundle there. So
yes.
If it went into the Flutter Mane, that would have been a KO, and then you've got Iron Bundle against Arcanine and the Iron Hands. The Iron Hands has taken like quite a significant chunk of damage. It's in the red, so Freeze Dry, we saw it do pitiful damage in that first game. Would have that been enough to KO the Iron Hands? We still could find out in this game. But if there would have been a Flare Blitz into the Flutter Mane there, and Iron Hands was able to survive the attack from the Iron Bundle, that would have been game for Juan, because they'd have just been able to go for Drain Punch and do the massive damage they need to the opposing Iron Bundle. But now you've put the Iron Bundle really low. Is that in Extreme Speed range? Because if it is, you can potentially be able to pick up the knockout with Extreme Speed there. I'm doubtful, based on the damage that the Flare Blitz did, because Iron Bundle, even though we mock its special defense, its physical defense is actually entirely respectable, so unlikely to be in range of that. And the Flutter Mane, it's a ghost. It doesn't really matter about the Extreme Speed, so you would be able to move first with both of Michael's Pokemon.
But instead, we see a Protect coming out from Juan Manuel's Arcanine. There was a Hydro Pump going into that slot from Iron Bundle, but of course Arcanine is kept safe from that. Flutter Mane is able to go for a Shadow Ball into Iron Hands on Juan Manuel's side, and of course that is enough for the knockout, given how low it was on health. And all of a sudden, it's 2 Pokemon for Michael against just the lonely Arcanine on Juan Manuel's side.
Yeah, so it seems like Michael will be able to wrap up this game 2 very, very nicely, and we are going into a game 3.
Going into game 3.
Excellent. So we've been waiting for that game 3. You did curse it, and we do have Iron Bundle available. So second curse incoming soon. We'll have to see. But yeah, really nice adaptation there. I was saying that Talonflame isn't necessary. I think the Dragonite adaptation was the necessary thing. The fact that it was able to do all the damage, get those Terror Blasts off, do really, really significant damage, turn into the Flying type so it's not weak to the Dazzling Gleams. Again, Dazzling Gleams were allowed to be launched off once again. We saw 3 Choice Specs Dazzling Gleams being launched off when only one had to be taken because you could have taken the knockout on the Fluttermane as well. But yeah, really nice adaptation for the Dragonites. The Talonflame, I'm still going to ask the question, is it still necessary? Because you still had the super fast Pokemon in the back, Iron Bundle and Fluttermane didn't really care about the Tailwinds. The only thing that the Tailwind really came into play for was the fact that the Dragonite outsped Fluttermane on turn 1. And then that didn't really matter in turn 2 and turn 3 because you didn't target it. You only went for Will-O-Wisp. You could have just Brave Bird KO'd with priority, and then that would have been okay as well. So, again, is the Tailwind still necessary? I think the Dragonite is brilliant and is likely to come to this game as well because it really put in the work.
Yep.
But still, does Talonflame need to come to this match?
How crucial do you think the critical hit on the flying Terra Blast was from Dragonite onto the Iron Hands?
It depends on if that put it in range of the Spec Shadow Ball. It was definitely in range after the crit, as we did see. It would have been very close, if not. So if that didn't happen, it would have come down to is the Iron Hands able to survive that Spec Shadow Ball? And then if it still KO'd, wouldn't have mattered. And if it did survive, then that could have changed the game, because then you do get a KO on either the Fluttermane or the Iron Bundle, and then maybe you've got the 2v1 to be able to take care of the last knockout. So definitely a good shout out there to keep in mind that did end up happening. And we would have been able to see if that would have been impactful in regards to whether that Iron Hands would have been able to be KO'd by that Shadow Ball.
Yeah, it's a Pokemon that Iron Hands wasn't really able to showcase its great physical defensive bulk in that game because of the critical hit, but it's a Pokemon that can absolutely clutch out an endgame when you don't know what else to rely on.
Yeah, absolutely. So does Juan need to make any adaptations? Do they need to leave the Fluttermane in the back, maybe? Because apparently you're allowed to just go for Dazzling Gleam after Dazzling Gleam, and that might be the strategy coming out for Juan again. Obviously leading with the Palafin. You always want to be leading with the Palafin if you do bring it to the match, because then you can switch out immediately. But here we go. This is a switch up coming from Michael. You've got the Iron Bundle and Great Tusk as your lead here. So and we do get the sneak peek as well, thanks to being able to see Michael's team. No Talonflame. So that has been left on the bench here, and now you can rely on the Icy Wind as your form of speed control instead. That would put the Fluttermane slower than the Great Tusk and then be able to do massive damage. And the Palafin, are you concerned with it at this point? Because it's not in its hero form, it wants to switch out. It is switching out. That frees up the Great Tusk to do what it wants this turn.
Frees up the Great Tusk, but hopefully doesn't freeze any of the Pokemon on Juan Manuel's side of the field as Intimidate comes out from the Arcanine into Great Tusk. It lowers the attack stat. Of course, Iron Bundle doesn't mind that so much. And it's another first turn Terror. And this one is going into Fluttermane for Juan Manuel, into that Fairy type. It seems like maybe it's going to be allowed to get off plenty more Dazzling Gleams, and that Great Tusk switching in, that's not something it would want to take if indeed that is what Juan Manuel went for. And we have a responding Terror from Michael, and that's going into his Great Tusk. So into the ground type, of course, which means that its fighting weakness to Fairy is now taken away, so it will be able to take those Dazzling Gleams much better, fortunately. Iron Bundle is able to go for our Icy Wind, and it does connect on both and gets a speed drop on the Fluttermane, and indeed the Arcanine. Of course, Arcanine will still have access to something like an Extreme Speed, but we see a Ground Terror boosted Headlong Rush that comes out into Fluttermane. It's not quite enough to pick up the knockout. It's down to very low HP, and again, a shout out to how well-trained this Fluttermane is as it responds with one of those infamous Fairy Terror Dazzling Gleams. Oh my goodness. Oh, wow. That is a knockout on Iron Bundle. It looks like it would have been on the Great Tusk had it not been for that Focus Sash. What a decisive first turn for Juan Manuel. And
that is exactly why you run bulk on your Fluttermane. You are allowed to do that with the choice specs, and we saw that come into play absolutely just then. The Intimidate from the Arcanine was absolutely necessary, but then the Fluttermane being able to survive, that's another Choice Specs Dazzling Gleam, and this time it was not into any resistances. We saw how much damage that can do. That almost took 2 knockouts and would have done if there was not a Focus Sash. Now the Great Tusk is in range of Extreme Speed, so that's no longer going to be really a consideration for Juan here. The only good side for that on Michael's side of the field is that the Fluttermane did go for that Terra Fairy. That means you can Extreme Speed it with your Dragonite now as well.
You can indeed, and we'll have to see if that is what Michael goes for, as Great Tusk is able to switch out for his Fluttermane in the back, so any Extreme Speeds there would not be very effective. An Extreme Speed does come out from Dragonite into Juan Manuel's terrifying Fairy Terror Fluttermane, and it does pick up the knockout. So that goes back to its Pokeball as Arcanine responds with its own Extreme Speed, but of course because Fluttermane is a Ghost type, it is not affected by that normal type move. And in return, Juan Manuel sends out his Palafin. Here comes the hero.
Yeah, absolutely, and now you can get some priority Jet Punches once again into that Fluttermane. but you maybe don't even need to. You've got full HP, and you can still just go for a Wave Crash into that Flutter Mane. You know that that would be guaranteed because the Great Tusk would be the only thing that can switch in, and that would be just KO'd absolutely because it's only on 1 HP. So there's not really much you can do to stop a Wave Crash KOing that Flutter Mane slot. Maybe it's going to be able to pick up the knockout on the opposing Palafin if you do go for that Specs Moonblast and then follow up with a Terra flying from the Dragonite into the opposing Palafin. You do have the Thunderbolt available on that Flutter Mane as well if you do want to lock into that. That might guarantee that the knockout is going to be put onto the opposing Arcanine. It would just mean you're a little bit weaker if the Iron Hands is waiting in the back. So that is a consideration to take into consideration for sure. Are you going to be able to take the knockout on the Palafin? Definitely not if you're targeting the Arcanine instead.
That's right, and it's big damage coming out from Extreme Speed. As a Jet Punch does come out from Palafin into Flutter Mane, it survives about a third of its health. As Shadow Ball comes out from Flutter Mane into Arcanine, and it's able to remove it from the field. Arcanine goes back to its Pokeball, and Juan Manuel is down to his final 2 Pokemon, and he sends out, of course, this Iron Hands in the back, full health, Assault Vest, a bulky Pokemon. Here it is.
Yeah, absolutely, and now Jet Punch KOs that slot, whether it's Flutter Mane or it's the Great Tusk. It doesn't matter which one, you get to click Jet Punch, you get a KO. So then you've got to contend with this Palafin with just your Dragonites. You can't do it with the Flutter Mane anymore, you can't do it with the Great Tusk. That will also be KO'd to a Jet Punch coming out. So there's nothing going to be stopping that, and just content to go for those Extreme Speeds instead.
Extreme Speed doesn't do too much damage as a Jet Punch is, of course, able to pick up this Flutter Mane. And that goes down for Michael, so now he's down to this 1 HP Great Tusk and Dragonite as a Wild Charge comes out from Iron Hands into Dragonite, taking it down to about half of its health. Of course, this Great Tusk has already committed the Terror, and here it is hitting the field again. It's so in range of a Jet Punch, and we'll have to see if it's able to go for a Protect.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key thing was that the Terror was committed for both players on that turn 1. Of course, the Dragonite can no longer have access to the Flying Terror Blasts, so its best option for hitting the Palafin is the Extreme Speed. And you can see how much damage that did. That's probably a 5-hit knockout based on the damage. So you just get to click Jet Punch into the Great Tusk slot, pin it down, and 2 Wild Charges would be able to KO that Dragonite. So it's going to be really, really tough for Michael to pull out from this one.
Really tough, and Great Tusk sort of does the only thing it can do and goes for the Protect, keeping itself safe from the damage that was coming out from that Palafin there. Dragonite able to go for a low kick, seeing what that does, and it's not too much, unfortunately. Dragonite is able to survive this Wild Charge, and the recoil damage is stacking up on this Dragonite, but I mean, look at that. We've got a Great Tusk on 1 HP and a Dragonite on 4. It's not looking good for Michael. Yeah,
I think Michael was just hoping that Palafin ate too many sandwiches there and increased its weight beyond the normal low kick damage that it would be able to do, because it's done like reasonable damage with the Extreme Speed, but not enough. That was a Jet Punch now into the opposing Great Tusk and able to pick up that KO. And then there's going to be the follow-up from the Wild Charge to be able to KO the Dragonite. So the Dragonite did very well. It took away a lot of the HP from the Palafin, but not enough there. And it is going to be Juan who is moving on to 6-0 in this tournament, 1 win away from that day 2.
Juan Manuel Odriozola, your winner of Swiss Round 6. Thumbs up indeed, Juan Manuel. Excellently well played. And as Jamie said, yes, 1 more win away from win and in. And Michael Kelsch, you know, he's all good-natured between the 2 players, which is always heartwarming to see. And it was good adaptations. It was pleasing to see it go to Game 3, and that's just a mark of the quality of these 2 players.
Yeah, absolutely. And the training that goes into the building of the teams as well. We saw exactly why you run defensive investment on your Flutter Mane. Because that's normally that Headlong Rush will absolutely KO a Flutter Mane. Its defense is so bad that the Ground Terror, even with the Intimidate, easily a KO because Great Tusk has fantastic attack. So then if you invest your training into the Flutter Mane, then that's going to be able to increase its bulk significantly, even if it's just a slight survival. That's a survival, and that's all you need to launch that Dazzling Gleam off.
Yeah, 1 HP, infinitely more than 0 HP. And we saw quite a few instances of 1 HP throughout that game, thanks in part to the Focus Sash. But I'm still not over that massive Dazzling Gleam that took the Great Tusk down to its Focus Sash and was able to completely clean out the, who's its partner?
The Iron Bundle.
The Iron Bundle, yeah.
Iron Bundle. Where I think the Terra Fairy is likely necessary to pick up that KO, because if you don't, then you'd be able to just go for the extreme speed from the Dragonite would no longer be able to affect the Flutter Mane, so the 1 HP doesn't really matter, or bears in the red health doesn't really matter. But the fact that you had to commit the Terra Fairy meant that you were in range of the extreme speed. And Dragonite was doing very well.
Yeah.
If the Great Tusk didn't go for that Terra, maybe the Dragonite, having access to its Terra Flying, would have been able to beat that Palafin. Because the extreme speed we saw was not enough. The low kick was not enough either. So Terra Blast from Flying type would have done significantly more than both of those attacks. And it got really close. So it would have likely KO'd the Palafin. But then are you able to take care of the Iron Hands afterwards as well? Yeah. Probably still not. Because I think it was a very killer turn 1 from Juan.
It was a killer turn 1. And, of course, yeah, in Game 2 it was that Flying Terra Dragonite that worked out so well for Michael. But in that particular scenario, maybe it wouldn't have been the call. And sometimes, you know, that's just Pokemon. If you lose that many resources so quickly, it's very hard to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. So, question answered. Yes, no. Talonflame, was it necessary in that Game 3? Because the Iron Bundle getting the speed control did extra chip damage to the opposing Flutter Mane. So that would have been necessary to be able to hopefully put it in Headlong Rush range. It didn't, unfortunately, for Michael. But yeah, the Iron Bundle, it seemed like it was going to be a good adaptation. And if it was strong enough, if that Headlong Rush did KO the Flutter Mane, that's just probably a game-winning position immediately for Michael. But yeah, really, really good training coming out from the Flutter Mane. And I think my question is left unanswered at this point. Because if the Talonflame came to that third game, we'll never know if it would have made an impact.
Philosophers will argue that question for centuries to come. But one thing was for certain, we still don't have an icy wind miss. So, phew.
He's still going for it.
Let off the hook.
Cursed two people now.
Well, yeah, we'll see if it comes out in future games. But always enjoyable seeing it go to a Game 3. And again, it's just a testament to the quality of the players at this point. Of course, both of these players up to this point were 5-0. They'd won all of their games so far. And so this is again, one of the brutal things about Pokemon. You can keep winning the rounds, but your opponents are only going to get tougher if you do keep winning, just as you're getting more and more tired. So it's really the mental side of Pokemon is definitely not something to be ignored.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're getting close. There's only 3 rounds left after this, and for some players, there's only one more win to be able to guarantee you are making it to Day 2. Obviously, you want to go for that 9-0 if you can, because that will really help you in the Day 2 Swiss. But yeah, just some players now are at the point of win and in. Do I make it to Day 2? And then you've just got to keep your focus in those last few games to be able to reach that Day 2.
Yeah, and if you can eke out just that little bit more attention and focus and concentration than your opponent, it could pay dividends, as I'm sure all the trainers in the hall here are really feeling the pressure start to mount up, at least for some of them anyway.
Yeah, and there's going to be some players that are just going for just any championship points. Yeah. If you go for the 6-3, then you're probably going to get championship points. 5-4, maybe. And that may be some players' aims. That's absolutely fine. If that's your goal, then go for it. Yeah, and there's going to be some players that are getting close to that. Maybe they've got it. Some players may be like, oh, I've got the 240 championship points we've seen on the leaderboards. Some players are very close to their Worlds invite. I just need points. Therefore, I'm content with just a 6-3 rating and not making Day 2 because I'll qualify for Worlds. Exactly. So there's going to be some players maybe in that situation, and we'll have to see if they are going to be able to get that last little push to get those CP.
Absolutely. As you said at the beginning of the stream, Jamie, just come in the top 64 for some of them. It's as simple as that. But yeah, it's championship points on the line, and I think it's a really good thing to call out that, of course, the majority of players here will be wanting to go all the way, potentially win the entire special event, but also, you know, it's interesting to talk to trainers about their sort of mini goals within that. If they don't go all the way, what would they like to do? Maybe it's just have a positive win-loss ratio. Maybe it's just beat a particular trainer they're matched up against, or maybe it's a particular team that they've struggled with. If they can clinch the win against that, that will be a big confidence boost. Yeah,
absolutely. And something to shout out as well, the players that did just win this round, they're going into the 6-0, that's guaranteed championship points at that point. Because now they've got at least the 6-3, and that's going to be championship points because their resistance is also going to be definitely good enough that they would be in the championship points if some 6-3s do end up missing. But yeah, you just want that one more, of course. If you're at the 6-0, that's the momentum really starting to build up. Because going like 2 losses early and then, oh, I have to win 7 in a row, I can't lose again, that's a lot trickier than going, I just need one more win out of these 3. Yeah. Therefore, I can afford to lose 2. That's a totally different situation. So getting that momentum going is going to be really, really good for those players. Yeah, and it's that mental hurdle thing of, as the day goes on, knowing you have to win every single game if you've lost your first 2. It's not something to be taken lightly, but as you say, you sort of
not only are the wins important for those championship points, but it's a confidence game as well. You know you've gone this far without having dropped a set, and just as the tiredness starts to creep in, you have that fallback if necessary. You could potentially drop a set and still make it into day 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got to, if you do make it into day 2, you've got to refocus and get that mental game right back in, because here's another 5 rounds of Swiss for you to contend with, so that you can get into that top cut as well, which everyone is obviously going to be aiming for. So yeah, just a few more rounds left in this day. We're going to be getting closer and closer to working out who is going to be advancing into that day 2, and we're going to be finding out some players in just the next round as well.
That's right. I can't wait to see how the standings are now, and you'll have to stick around to see what the standings are looking like. We're just getting set up for an interview with the winner of that previous round, and hopefully we'll be able to bring that to you shortly. And indeed, I believe we can do that now. So why don't we throw it over to the interview with your winner, Juan Odriozola.
Welcome back, everybody. We are here with your round 5 winner, of course, of the Swiss, Juan Odriozola. Welcome, Juan, and huge congratulations, of course, on that terrific win. How does it feel?
It feels awesome. Starting the tournament 6-0, 1 win away from making day 2.
Yeah.
I can't complain at all about how this run has gone, to be honest.
I mean, so far it's been undefeated.
Yeah.
It's been amazing, right?
Yeah.
But there was a lot of sort of different interactions with that match. Was very intense. I could imagine just from viewing it from outside of the field, I can imagine it's so much more intense actually playing and being involved in it, right?
Yeah, like, both flattermates were really crucial to the matchup because they were so bulky, both mine and my opponents.
Yeah. I mean, it was very incredible. Not something we commonly see, but then it sort of makes sense with the choice specs, right? Because you at least can add a bit more damage output and retrain to be a bit more bulky.
Exactly. Yeah. You can take advantage of the choice specs bulk, put it into bulk and tank things you normally wouldn't do.
Right, exactly. So I think it's not what a lot of people actually expected, but some people are starting to say, you know what, it actually makes a lot of sense. You're able to sort of reprioritize and make sure that you can take a bit more damage at the cost of being able to still deal a lot of damage back.
Yeah, and win some turns too, because my bulky flatter main in the end helped me a lot to stall out his tailwind. Although I didn't have a stable flatter main, a lot of speed options.
Yes, I mean, it's speed control-wise, right? So, yeah, we did see the tailwind game 1 went quite well. There were sort of the different Terras that were chosen. So, in game 1, I think we saw a steel Terra flutter main.
Yeah, that was annoying for me, but I had to go for the Terra Fairy on my flutter main because I will die from Shadow Ball.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, you were still able to have your flutter main on the field, go for the continuous damage to the point where you're starting to whittle down the HP, right?
That chip was really crucial at the end of the game.
Yeah. I mean, it was great to see. So it was a really good way to manage your resource availability. So going into game 2, we saw completely different Terras.
Yeah.
We saw your Palafin, the hero, of course, Water Terra type, and then I believe it was a Dragonite that also had the Flying Terra type over on Mikhail's side. So I don't think anyone expected the survival on the Flutter main coming out from the Jet Punch, Water Terra boosted, Mystic Water boosted, Palafin out of all types of Pokemon.
We are probably like a really similar book. Because my Flutter main also tanks Terra Water Jet Punch.
Are you sure you guys didn't team build together, perhaps?
We didn't.
But I mean, it was amazing to see, right? Because it sort of forced the game into certain scenarios where you weren't sure anymore of, oh no, wait, I didn't expect that. That threw out the flowchart completely, right?
But that's the good thing about EV Express. Although the team is somewhat standard, you can play with those EV Express to change the outcome of the games just from book alone.
Oh, well, that's it. And I think that's the sort of idea behind trying to get that additional secret bulk, because open team sheets, it's not going to reveal everything, right? Sure, you can see the item, you can see the moves, the ability, but not how you've trained your Pokemon.
Exactly. Like, for example, the Game 3 double up, it was a roll, but I had to rely on that.
It was your win condition at the time, right?
Exactly.
So
if I managed to survive, I would have got the key into bundle and put Taz into either Jet Punch or Extreme Speed range.
Well, exactly, because...
And gain a lot of momentum.
Well, that's it. And I think as long as you had that moment where you're able to secure the Great Tusk down to at least, even if it's not Focus Sash, at least within range so you could get the Jet Punch, you knew the game was sealed. That's all you needed. That's survival. It was crucial, but it worked in your favor, and you did really well to identify that as well.
It was my only win goal, I think. I had to rely on that, and it paid out.
It really did. So, I mean, 6-0. How does it feel? You've got 3 more rounds.
It feels awesome, especially after bombing out Liverpool. I did really bad. Like, I started 3-2 and I ended up 4-5. My mental went out. Like, I didn't have any trust in myself going into the final rounds of the tournament. So it feels awesome, like, having that comeback after that performance.
It's very tough because it's a very mental strength-based game, right? So you've got to be able to have a couple of breaks, just mentally, so many mind games, so many different scenarios to consider. It's sort of like 4D chess, just with our lovable, cute Pokemon.
At the end of the day, we're playing here, like, in the venue, we're like 10+ hours.
Exactly.
We are going to get really tired, and it is normal to make mistakes.
Oh, I mean, it's natural. We're not all robotic, right?
Exactly.
Even though there's a lot of iron kind of Pokemon going around, like your Iron Hands, for example, which we saw you positioned it quite well at the end sort of game, where you just deal a bit of damage onto the Dragonite and make sure that you can limit it.
It was a little bit unfortunate in Game 2, the crit, but it is what it is. This is the game we play.
Oh, exactly. I mean, that is literally the game that we play. So, going into this tournament then, Juan, how was your preparation? Were you feeling good about it? Were you just checking out what the other events, what won the other events and what was trending?
I didn't really prepare as hard as I did in other tournaments. Like, I ladder a lot.
Yep.
I feel like the team has pretty neutral matchups into everything. Some matchups, like for example, Len's trick routine. That matchup is awful, but it is what it is.
I mean, yeah, it's sort of like the situation where you can try to cover as much as you can, but there's always going to be one hole in the ship that you're not going to be able to cover.
Yeah, but instead of relying flowcharts as much, I really wanted my intuition as a player take advantage of that. Yeah. Like, don't focus too much on the flowchart, just
feel the game, feel the flow. Right?
Exactly.
Like, you got to trust yourself, but also your team.
Exactly.
You know, as long as you do that and you're in a good enough position, you feel good, maybe RNG is neutral, maybe goes in your favor, you just got to try to take advantage of it, right? And I think you've done that incredibly well, which has been an absolute pleasure to actually see that set. It's one of the best so far.
It was really fun.
No, honestly, I really...
Perhaps to my opponent, because he played really well.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it was decided on a roll, and it is what it is.
It could have gone either way. Right?
Exactly.
It's one of those games. But, of course, you were able to do incredibly well, so huge props to you. I would say, tell us a bit about yourself with your experience. I believe you had actually reached top 8 in Bilbao, special events last year.
I went 8-0 in Swiss.
Oh, that's right, I remember.
Then I was hit hard by the X and Zero course. But I mean, it was my second major tournament.
Yeah.
Being able to cut the tournament playing opponents like Poke Alex and Hippolyte Bernard, which are two amazing players.
One of the best, both of the best of Europe, right?
Exactly.
Like, they're so consistent, as well as with their team building.
Yes.
They're absolutely phenomenal.
So it was amazing. Just so early start making results. It was an absolute pleasure. And looking forward, I expect to make day 2. Let's hope.
Fingers crossed. I mean, you've got, essentially, since we've got the guaranteed X2, right?
Yes.
Go into Swiss. So you need a 7-0 record at minimum. So all you need to do is try to focus in and try to win out round 6. The next round, it's okay if you don't, you still got additional chances, right?
Yes.
So it's just about getting some good rest, but already you've proven how powerful you are when it comes to your stamina, your mental strength.
I mean, the worst part is already done. I came here. I'm now 6-0 so far.
That's it. Yeah.
3 rounds to go. I have margin of error, so I'll do my best.
Mate, we are all backing you. It has been an absolute pleasure, of course. Do you want to have any shout-outs to anyone in specific?
Sure. I want to shout out La Barbarie, Poke Hornets, Elande for the support, also Gabe, Easy, Bars for the input of the team. It really has paid out. Their input of how they play tournaments with this team, it was really useful. And also, shout outs to Snow for trading me the Palafin I'm using today. It was really cool. He's the creator of the team.
Yeah.
And I asked him, hey, I'm going to bring your team to Utrecht. It would be really cool to bring your Palafin.
Yeah.
And he said, sure.
Said, sure, as long as you win with it. That's all you need to do, and I'll be happy, right?
Yeah.
But of course, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, Juan, we all are wishing you the very best in your progression into day 2. Of course, what we will be doing, ladies and gents, is we'll be cutting to a very short break where we will be back at some point with our round 6 of the 2023 Pokemon Utrecht special event.